Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and Donald Trump has much ahead of him in the next 45 days, transitioning to the presidency, and then certainly in the proverbial first 100 days, what his policy agenda is going to be. And in the first 2 years, where he knows he will have Republican majorities in Congress, what should he do to take advantage of that position and bring the American people along, particularly those, so many of whom are skeptical of his forthcoming presidency? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Genevieve Wood. She is senior contributor for the Daily Signal and a senior fellow in communications at the Heritage Foundation. Genevieve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, good to be with you.
Last year, the Heritage Foundation, or was it earlier this year? I don't know. They all run together. But the Heritage Foundation put out a policy book with about 72 million recommendations for what needs to be done to make the federal government financeable and representative of the American people's interests. Give us the kind of some of the highlights, if you were in the inner sanctum with Donald Trump, what you would be suggesting his policy agenda should look like out of the gate.
Sure. Well, I mean, as you rightly said, there are so many ways you could go because there's so many things and areas that need to be addressed. But I think probably the very first two things, well, let me say three. Number one, something he could do on his own without having to go through Congress on this, because this is what our current president, President Obama, has done, is go through and basically repeal all the executive orders that President Obama did going around Congress to make laws. So all the amnesty changes that President Obama did when it came to immigration, I think Donald Trump should go in and reverse those immediately. He could do that day one in office. I think that the next two things that he ought to do, one is the Supreme Court vacancy that we have from Justice Scalia. I think they can jump on that immediately. And again, they can start setting up those hearings even now. You don't have to wait until January when they come into office. Congress can start setting up those hearings today. And then third is repealing Obamacare. Again, this is something that has precedent in Congress. The problem was always that you had a president who, when it reached his desk, if there was a repeal legislation, he was going to veto it. He did. So that's something, again, Congress can send that again through, and then President Trump can repeal it. So I would start with those three, and then obviously there's a whole host of other things he's going to have to take up.
Yeah, Genevieve, what do you think about the Iran nuclear deal? What do you see that future being?
Well, again, this is another area where the president completely went around, in this case, the Senate went around lawmakers making a deal. I think that President Trump ought to, quote unquote, not just renegotiate it, but say, we're taking that off the table. The United States is no longer going to be bound by that deal. I think that's something he could definitely do. And speaking of foreign policy and military, our military, we just put out, or we'll be putting out next week, an index that looks like this at the strength of the U.S. military. And whether you're talking about the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, every branch of the military, our readiness levels are not near where they need to be. So that's something I think he needs to get a national security team together very quickly, a new military team together very quickly, and start looking at how do we make sure, where do we start rebuilding now to make sure we're prepared for whatever may come up.
I want to go back to the EOs for a minute. The executive orders, you mentioned the executive amnesty, executive order that could be rescinded. There are other areas where he could, with the stroke of a pen, knock out some of the more pernicious gambits of the Obama administration as an opening salvo.
Well, there are. I mean, and a lot of them come, Dan, in the areas of regulations. I mean, as I'm sure many of your audience members know, the history of presidents, especially in recent years, it's not just President Obama, it's included Bush and others, but President Obama really went at it. The number of regulations that have increased on individuals and businesses without Congress being involved has just skyrocketed in the past 8 years. And so that's everything from, business taxes to environmental regulations that come through places like the EPA. Those are things that, again, a president himself can come in and take out those executive orders or direct his agencies to take out those executive orders. Because in many cases, what you had going on was folks at Health and Human Services or the folks over at the Environmental Protection Agency basically making up rules which kind of turn into laws, doing it without any consultation with Congress, without Congress signing off on anything. Those are things that need to be overturned because those are the kinds of things that have really put a hold on the economy. That's hurt jobs. It makes energy costs more. And those are things that I think he could do very quickly in the first 100 days.
Yeah, I would like him to go after the unaccountable administrative state through his cabinet officers and directors and the like, and also explain what he's doing as he's doing it, so that people just understand the depths, the tentacles of the administrative state, how stifling they are, how unaccountable they are. That would be such a productive exercise for the American people, and kind of from an educational perspective, in addition to from an economic one.
No, I think that's a terrific idea. I hope he does that because you're absolutely right. I think people clearly had a very real sense that the country was on the wrong track. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the get out the vote efforts and all that, and I do believe that the Republican National Committee had a better game plan this time around than they did 4 years ago. But I would argue that the biggest get out the vote effort that Donald Trump had was the fact that people were very worried about the future. When you have a $20 trillion debt hanging around your neck, when you're getting premium notices in the mail saying that your health care is going up again, when you think your borders are not secure, you don't really need somebody to call you on the phone or knock on the door and tell you it's election day.
Yeah.
And those are very motivating factors. And so I think for him to do what you suggested of really showing people, here's how bad off it's gotten, folks, not because he's still running, he's won now, but to really show here's how we have to go about fixing it, because there will be some moments where it's going to be tough to change things, and he's still going to need the public to be behind him, and so they need to understand why he's doing what he's doing.
Now, do you think he will build a wall? Do you think he'll have a ban on Muslims, things that he campaigned on?
Well, look, I think he's going to. Every politician makes promises they don't eventually end up keeping. But I think he's made some that were so critical and to the core of why he was elected, he's going to have to keep them. And I think he wants to. The wall's a perfect example. Look, the Congress passed several years ago legislation that authorized the building of about a 700-mile wall. What happened? They just never implemented it. They never allocated the money to go do it. So it's not as though this hasn't been tried before in Congress and passed. They just never had anybody then take the leadership role and say, let's now go do it. Let's allocate the money to do it. So I think that is in some ways maybe less of a hurdle than people may think. It won't be easy, but I think, again, that was, people would say, well, he didn't get a mandate. I would argue that he did. It was very clear what he was running on. It was very clear what he said he wanted to do when he got into office. And he got more people voting that way than I think many folks in Washington expected. So I would expect the wall and that issue to come up very soon.
We're talking to Genevieve Wood, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Genevieve, a lot of policy recommendations from the Heritage Foundation, but your organization's president is former South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, a highly respected conservative former policymaker, or still a policymaker, but in a different role of sorts. And I wonder if you have personnel recommendations, or the Heritage Foundation will have personnel recommendations. I know you were involved in suggesting possible Supreme Court nominees. What about cabinet officers for specific posts?
Yes, we do have actually a number of folks at Heritage that are working with the Trump transition team, and actually have been for a number of weeks, because we couldn't be involved in the election side, but we could be involved on a legal matter on the transition team, and they are working on that now. I mean, they've been actually assembling resumes and personnel recommendations for a couple of months now to still post across the government. Because, yes, there's at the very top, you have the secretaries of these agencies, but a president has the ability to appoint almost 7,000 appointments. When you add up all the different agencies in Washington and all the political appointments that go there, it's like about 3,000 to 4,000. Then you have those in the legal area. You have those that go to boards and committees. So there's, beyond the president, it's one reason it's so important who the president is, because they appoint so many people that then carry out a certain agenda across the government. And so there's about, like I said, up to 7,000 openings that a Donald Trump administration will have to come in and fill. And we're working with them on basically every level. The cabinet post will likely come first. But many of these others, you got to have the folks that can actually implement the policy, and that's where it goes all the way down.
That's right. And now this is not a quid pro quo, but I would implore you to put me on the short list for ambassador to New Zealand, because I want to follow in the footsteps of another illustrious Illinoisan, Carol Moseley Braun. Yeah, I think there'd be nice continuity there for that ambassadorship.
We'll see what we can do on that, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Amy, do you have anywhere you want to go?
Ambassador of Sweden, please.
Yeah, we like
great.
we like the ambassadorships. Yeah, they're nice. Genevieve Wood, she is the senior contributor to the Daily Signal, dailysignal.com. She's a senior fellow in communications at the Heritage Foundation. Genevieve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.